The air in the penthouse boardroom felt expensive and strangely cold. Brooke sat at the far end of a long mahogany table, staring out at the glittering skyline while everyone waited for the will reading to begin. Across from her, Ashley leaned back with that confident little smile, the kind that said she already knew how this story ended. Uncle Stephen watched quietly. So did Brooke's 10-year-old son, Griffin. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, you'll recognize that silence. They expected Brooke to leave with nothing. What they didn't expect was what came next. Ashley didn't even wait for the attorney to open his briefcase. She leaned forward across the long table, diamonds catching the sterile light above us, and let out a quiet little laugh that felt sharper than it sounded. Not the kind of laugh you share with someone, the kind you aim at them. Her eyes drifted past me and landed on Griffin. Don't bother getting comfortable. Brooke, she said softly, almost kindly, the way people talk when they're pretending not to be cruel. Dad finally came to his senses before the end. She tilted her head, studying me like a problem that had already been solved. You're getting exactly what you're worth to this family. The word hung in the air. Nothing. Across the table, Uncle Stephen leaned back in his leather chair with a slow creak, adjusting the silk tie at his collar. He didn't rush to speak. He didn't need to. The smirk on his face did most of the work for him. That oily little smile said everything. The verdict had already been decided in their minds. To them, this meeting wasn't about a will. It was about closure. The official moment when the inconvenient daughter, the runaway, the disappointment, the family ghost was finally written out of the story. And the room believed it. Cousins shifted awkwardly in their seats. A few avoided my eyes completely. It was easier that way. Easier to believe the narrative Ashley had been polishing for years. That I'd walked away. That I hadn't been there. That I didn't deserve to be. Have you ever sat in a room where everyone already agrees on who the villain is? And that villain happens to be you. Because that's what this felt like. Ashley crossed her legs, her heel tapping lightly against the polished wood floor. You know, she continued, voice dripping with that rehearsed sympathy. I really do hope you're doing okay, Brooke. Social work can't be paying very well these days. Her eyes flicked toward Griffin again. Must be hard, raising a kid on that kind of salary. Stephen chuckled under his breath, low, amused. The sound slid across the room like smoke. I didn't respond, not with words. Instead, I reached calmly into my bag. The movement was slow enough that everyone noticed. Ashley's eyebrows twitched slightly as I pulled out a small digital recorder, sleek, professional, the kind used in formal interviews. I placed it carefully in the center of the table. Click. The sound of plastic touching polished wood echoed through the quiet room like a starting gun. Ashley's smile faltered for half a second. Just half, really, she said, with a brittle laugh. Planning to document your dramatic exit? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My hands rested calmly in my lap, fingers folded, breathing steady. For 10 years, Ashley had been waiting for this moment, for tears, for shouting, for some emotional collapse she could point to and say, "See, I told you." She was unstable, but the scene she'd written never arrived. Beside me, Griffin shifted in his chair, quietly, deliberately. He opened his small backpack and reached inside, pulling out something no one else in the room had noticed yet. A small black USB drive. He held it between his thumb and finger for a moment, studying it like it was far more important than it looked. Then his eyes lifted across the table, not toward Ashley, toward Stephen. The smirk on my uncle's face tightened slightly as he noticed. And for the first time since the meeting began, the balance in the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a subtle change in the air. Ashley was still talking, still playing to the room, still confident the ending belonged to her. But the truth was something they hadn't realized yet. I hadn't come here to argue about inheritance. I hadn't come to beg. I hadn't even come to defend myself. I had come to account for something. And for the first time in a long time, I was perfectly willing to let them keep talking. While Ashley kept talking, filling the room with her polished little performance, my attention drifted somewhere else. Not to the skyline outside the windows. Not to the will sitting unopened in Mr. Sterling's briefcase. My mind went somewhere far less glamorous, a hospital room. Because the truth is, when Ashley looked around this penthouse boardroom, she probably saw a throne room, a place where power lived. But when I looked at it, I saw the graveyard of my 30s. The smell of antiseptic replaced the expensive air in my memory. The quiet beep of a heart monitor echoing somewhere behind my thoughts. For the past decade, while Ashley was busy building her brand as the city's favorite luxury realtor, and Steven was polishing his reputation on golf courses and corporate lunches, I'd been doing something else entirely. I had been balancing the books of a family that didn't even admit I was part of it. You see, families like ours don't collapse all at once. They crack slowly, quietly, and someone always ends up filling the gaps. That someone was me. 3 years earlier, the estate had nearly fallen into foreclosure. Steven forgot to file a piece of tax paperwork, something simple, something routine. But simple mistakes become very expensive when you're dealing with properties and investment accounts. $72,000. That was the lien that landed on the primary estate. There was no emergency family meeting. No dramatic conversation about responsibility. I didn't call Ashley. I didn't call Steven. I wired the money, straight out of my own savings. Problem solved, at least for them. Then there were the medical bills. Dad's condition had been getting worse for years, and specialized nursing care doesn't come cheap. Insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. $8,000 a month. That's what the extra care cost. Every month. And again, there were no big family discussions about who would help. No round-table planning sessions about shared responsibility. There was just me, picking up extra shifts at the clinic, working weekends, sometimes staying so late that Griffin would fall asleep on the couch waiting for me to come home. Over time, those payments added up to $210,000. $210,000 quietly transferred into a system that was supposedly running without me. That number sat in my head now like a ledger entry carved in stone. $210,000, the price of my so-called abandonment. Funny how stories work inside families. Ashley's version was simple, clean, easy to repeat at dinners and holiday gatherings. Brooke ran away. Brooke couldn't handle the pressure. Brooke left us to take care of everything. It's amazing how convincing a lie can become when the truth stays quiet long enough. In my work as a social worker, we actually have a term for this dynamic: the scapegoat. Every toxic family system needs one. It's the person who carries the weight of everyone else's failures. The one who absorbs the blame so the rest of the structure can keep pretending it's healthy. And here's the strange part. Most of the time, the scapegoat is also the one doing the most work, paying the bills, solving the crises, holding everything together behind the scenes. But if the family acknowledged that, the whole story would collapse, because then they'd have to face something uncomfortable, their own reflection. And people who build their identities on comfort rarely want mirrors. So they rewrite the story. They turn the strong one into the unstable one. The helper becomes the problem. The quiet sacrifice becomes selfishness. And if you stay silent long enough, eventually everyone starts believing it, even the person being erased. For years I kept telling myself the silence was temporary, that someday Dad would see what was really happening, that someday Ashley's performance would crack. But silence has a funny way of growing roots. You start to believe keeping the peace is the same thing as doing the right thing. You tell yourself it's not worth the fight, that family is family, that the truth will eventually speak for itself. But the truth doesn't speak. People do. And if the only voices in the room belong to the people rewriting the story, the lie becomes history. So for 10 years, I let them talk. I let them shape the narrative. I let them call me the ghost of the family. What they didn't realize was that ghosts see everything. Every transaction, every withdrawal, every little detail that doesn't quite add up. And while Ashley had been rehearsing speeches about loyalty and sacrifice, I'd been keeping something much simpler: records, receipts, proof. They thought they were about to erase me from the family ledger. What they didn't understand yet was that I'd been balancing the books the entire time. Ashley pushed her chair back with a slow scrape against the polished floor, the sound sharp enough to slice through the quiet room. She stood up like she was stepping onto a stage she had been rehearsing for years. And maybe she had. Her silk dress rustled softly as she began to pace around the table, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, the other gesturing, just enough to keep every eye in the room fixed on her. This whole thing is, honestly, tragic, she said, her voice suddenly warm, almost maternal. The kind of tone people use when they're pretending to feel sorry for someone they actually despise. Her gaze drifted across the cousins, the distant relatives, the family friends who had been invited to witness the reading of the will. Then she stopped and looked directly at me. "We all know why Brooke is really here," she continued gently. A few people shifted in their chairs. Ashley sighed, like the weight of the truth was just too heavy for her to carry alone. "She's struggling." The word lingered in the air. Social work doesn't exactly pay for the lifestyle she always thought she deserved, does it? A quiet ripple moved through the room. Not quite laughter, not quite agreement. Just the uncomfortable murmur of people who didn't want to challenge the story being told. Ashley clasped her hands together like a concerned older sister. "So she's come back to haunt us," she said softly, dragging that poor boy along as part of her little performance. Her eyes flicked toward Griffin. For a split second, the room felt smaller. Griffin didn't react. He sat still beside me, shoulders straight, his small backpack resting against his chair. Ashley turned away from us and faced the rest of the room again, her voice growing stronger, more confident with every word. "It's funny how memory works," she said, "because some of us remember what really happened." She placed a hand over her chest like she was telling a painful truth. "When Dad got sick, when things started getting really bad, Brooke disappeared." A cousin near the end of the table lowered his eyes. Another woman shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Ashley shook her head. Slowly, the picture of patient disappointment. She ran away to find herself, remember? She said, adding the little air quotes with her fingers. Meanwhile, I was the one dealing with the doctors, the paperwork, the endless hospital visits. She laughed quietly, the emotional weight of watching our father die. Her voice cracked just enough to make the performance believable. And now she said, turning back toward me, she wants a piece of the empire she didn't help build. The accusation settled over the room like fog. Stephen chose that moment to lean forward, resting his elbows on the table. His voice came out low and gravelly, carrying the slow confidence of someone who believed the room already belonged to him. It's about character, Brooke. He paused, letting the words sink in. Family isn't just blood, it's loyalty. His eyes moved deliberately from my face to Griffin. Something you clearly lack. A couple of people shifted in their seats again. Still no one spoke. Stephen's lip curled slightly as he nodded toward my son. Look at the kid, he said. The casual cruelty in his voice was almost impressive. Probably doesn't even know who his father is. The room stiffened. You've raised him in a vacuum of your own resentment, Stephen continued. That's what happens when people spend their lives blaming everyone else for their failures. Ashley crossed her arms, watching me carefully now, waiting. They both were, waiting for the reaction, for the anger, the tears, the explosion that would prove everything they'd been saying all along. But the reaction never came. I sat perfectly still in my chair, hands resting lightly in my lap, my breathing slow, my face calm. Across the table, Ashley's eyes flicked briefly toward the recorder sitting between us, the small red light blinking steadily, recording every word. She noticed it, but she didn't stop, because people like Ashley don't know how to stop when they think they're winning. She stepped behind my chair then, leaning down slightly, her perfume drifting into the air between us. Just sign the waiver, Brooke, she murmured quietly enough that it almost sounded kind. Give up the ghost. Her voice dropped even lower. If you walk out now, I might convince Stephen to write you a check. She paused for effect. $5,000. Ashley straightened and looked toward Griffin again. Just to make sure he has shoes for school. The words hung there, heavy, cruel. The kind of cruelty people justify by convincing themselves they're being generous. More than you're legally entitled to, she added. A few cousins glanced at me again. Still waiting, still hoping someone else would say something first. But silence is contagious in rooms like this. No one wants to be the first person to break it. Ashley slowly returned to her seat, crossing her legs again with the smooth confidence of someone who believed the conversation was over. Facts are facts, Brooke, she said lightly. You weren't there. Her smile sharpened. And Dad made it very clear how he felt about that. I finally looked up, not at Ashley, at Mr. Sterling. The attorney sat quietly at the end of the table, his hands resting on a thick folder that had not yet been opened. His expression hadn't changed, but his eyes had, because unlike the others in the room, he knew something they didn't. Ashley mistook my silence for defeat. She leaned back comfortably in her chair, satisfied. Across the table, Stephen's smug little smile returned. The room relaxed again. The verdict had already been delivered in their minds. What they didn't realize, what none of them realized yet, was that every accusation, every lie, every insult aimed at me and at my son had just been carefully etched into a permanent digital record. And I had no intention of interrupting them while they finished writing their own confession. Ashley settled back into her chair like the performance was over. The room followed her lead, shoulders relaxed. A few people looked toward Mr. Sterling, expecting him to finally open the briefcase and read the will that would officially confirm what Ashley had already declared. Case closed. I watched the sunlight drifting across the long mahogany table, tiny particles of dust floating through the beam like slow-moving stars. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I looked up. Mr. Sterling, I said quietly. The attorney's eyes lifted from the folder in front of him. Ashley rolled her eyes immediately. Brooke, honestly, I'd like you. I continued calmly to review the notice of contingency I filed 2 weeks ago, along with the forensic audit attached to it. The words landed in the center of the table like a glass dropped on marble. No one moved. Ashley blinked. What she asked, a sharp little laugh slipping out as if she'd misheard me. Across the table, Stephen's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "What audit?" he said. His voice was still confident, but the edges of it had changed. I didn't look at him right away. Instead, I kept my eyes on Mr. Sterling. "I believe the documentation is in the second folder," I said. The attorney didn't rush. He simply opened his briefcase, slid out a thick tabbed file, and placed it on the table. The sound of the paper landing echoed through the room. Ashley leaned forward, irritation flashing across her face. "This is ridiculous," she said. "She doesn't have any legal standing to—" "I do actually," I said. Now I turned toward her. My voice stayed calm, because I'm not here as a beneficiary. Silence settled over the room again. "I'm here," I continued, "as a creditor." Stephen let out a short laugh, too fast, too loud. "That's absurd." He leaned forward, spreading his hands across the table like he was explaining something obvious to a child. "You can't just walk into a will reading and invent a claim against an estate, Brooke. That's not how any of this works." I nodded slightly. "You're right," I said. "It isn't." I reached into my bag and slid a thin stack of papers across the table toward Mr. Sterling. "That's why the documentation was filed through proper channels 14 days ago." The attorney flipped open the folder. The quiet rustle of pages seemed suddenly very loud. I watched Stephen's face as his eyes flicked down toward the paperwork. His smile didn't disappear right away, but it tightened. Ashley looked between us impatiently. "Can someone explain what she's talking about?" she snapped. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "It appears," he said slowly, "that Ms. Brooke filed a financial claim against the estate based on documented capital contributions." The words seemed to drain the air from the room. Stephen's pen slipped slightly in his fingers. "That's nonsense," he muttered. I leaned back in my chair. "For the past 3 years," I said evenly, "the primary estate has experienced several financial emergencies." No one interrupted me now. When the property tax lien hit the main residence, I continued. $72,000 was wired directly from my personal savings to prevent foreclosure. A cousin near the end of the table sat up straighter. Ashley's mouth opened slightly. "And when Dad's specialized nursing care exceeded insurance coverage by $8,000 a month," I added. "Those payments were also made privately." My gaze shifted slowly across the room. "Out of pocket." I folded my hands again. "Over the course of 36 months, those contributions totaled $210,000. No one spoke. You could almost hear the numbers settling into everyone's mind. 210,000. Ashley shook her head quickly. "That's impossible," she said. "If you were paying for all of that, we would have known." I looked at her. "Would you?" That was the moment the first crack appeared. Not in Ashley, in Stephen. His jaw tightened. Because while Ashley had been telling stories, Stephen had been watching the numbers. And numbers were something he understood very well. Mr. Sterling continued turning pages. "There are also," he said carefully, "several irregularities flagged in the audit." Stephen's head snapped up. "What irregularities?" The attorney didn't answer immediately. Instead, he adjusted his glasses and scanned the report again. "Large cash withdrawals," he said. A few people shifted in their seats. "Consultation payments issued to private firms." His finger moved down the page. "And signatures that appear inconsistent with those on file." Stephen's chair creaked as he leaned back. "That's a fabrication," he said quickly. But the confidence from earlier was gone. Ashley looked between us again, her expression tightening. "What is she doing?" she whispered. I finally turned toward Stephen. My voice dropped slightly. Because one thing kept bothering me, I said. His eyes met mine, cold, careful. A $40,000 consultation fee I continued quietly issued to your firm. The room had gone completely still. And the interesting thing about that payment, I paused, is that it was approved while Dad was in a semi-coma state. Stephen didn't answer. He just stared at the documents in front of Mr. Sterling. For the first time since the meeting began, the man who thought he controlled the room looked like he was trying to calculate how much ground had just disappeared beneath his feet. The room had fallen into a strange, suffocating silence. Not the kind that comes from peace. The kind that comes when something fragile begins to crack. Stephen was still staring at the documents in front of Mr. Sterling like they might rearrange themselves if he looked long enough. Ashley had stopped pacing entirely. Her confidence, the smooth, polished confidence she had walked in with, was beginning to fray around the edges. "You're making this up," she finally snapped, her voice rising. "You've always been obsessed with money, Brooke. This whole thing is just another..." She stopped because a chair moved beside me. It wasn't loud, just the quiet scrape of wood against the floor. Griffin stood up. For a moment, no one reacted. He was only 10 after all. In a room full of adults fighting over legal documents and financial records, a child standing up shouldn't have meant anything. But Griffin didn't look nervous. He didn't look confused. He looked steady. His small hand rested on the table for balance, and with the other, he reached into his backpack again. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out the small black USB drive, the same one he'd been holding earlier. The room's attention shifted almost instantly. Stephen noticed first. His eyes narrowed slightly as Griffin stepped forward. Ashley gave a short, irritated laugh. "What is this now?" she said. "Brooke, are we really dragging your kid into this circus?" Griffin didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the attorney. "You forgot the video," he said. His voice was calm, clear. The words landed in the middle of the room like a dropped glass. Mr. Sterling frowned slightly. "Video." Griffin nodded and placed the USB drive gently on the table. "Grandpa recorded it," he said. Now the silence changed. It wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. It was heavy. "What video?" Ashley asked quickly. Griffin turned his head slightly toward me. His voice softened just a little. "Grandpa told me to wait." My heartbeat picked up for the first time that morning. "Wait for what?" I asked quietly. Griffin looked back toward the front of the room. "He said if they started telling lies about you, I had to show the truth." No one moved. Stephen's face had gone pale in a way that had nothing to do with lighting. Ashley laughed again, but the sound came out thin and brittle. "This is ridiculous," she said. "A child with a flash drive isn't evidence of anything." But Mr. Sterling had already reached for it. He picked up the drive and turned it between his fingers, examining it briefly, before walking toward the laptop connected to the boardroom's massive display screen. The technology in the room had been installed for presentations, property deals, corporate meetings, million-dollar negotiations. No one had imagined it would be used for this. The USB slid into the port with a soft click. Every person in the room seemed to lean forward at the same time. The large 80-inch monitor mounted on the wall flickered to life. A file window appeared. There was only one video. Mr. Sterling double-clicked it. For a second, the screen went black. The quiet hum of the air conditioning filled the space like distant static. Then the image appeared. A desk, old oak wood, and sitting behind it, my father. The room seemed to freeze. He looked thinner than I remembered from those last months. His skin had the pale, almost translucent look illness leaves behind, but his eyes, Those were unmistakable, focused, clear, alive with a kind of determination I hadn't seen in years. In the lower corner of the video, a digital timestamp glowed, 14 days before his passing. Ashley made a small, choking sound beside the table. "Turn that off," she whispered. No one moved. On the screen, my father leaned slightly closer to the camera. "Hi, Brooke." His voice filled the boardroom. Strong, steady. The sound of it sent a cold shiver straight down my spine. Ashley staggered back a step like she'd been hit. "He wasn't supposed to," she started, then stopped herself. My father continued speaking. "If you're watching this, it means my family has done exactly what I feared they would." Every eye in the room was locked on the screen now. It means Ashley has finished the story she's been telling for years. Ashley lunged forward, suddenly reaching toward the laptop. But Mr. Sterling stepped in front of her before she could get close. "Sit down, Ashley." On the screen, my father didn't pause, and it means, "Stephen," he continued, "calmly has buried the truth under a mountain of paperwork." Stephen didn't move, but the color drained slowly from his face. "I'm sorry, Brooke," my father said, his voice quieter now. "I let them convince me that your silence meant you didn't care." The room was completely still. "I believed the story they told me, that the money you were sending was some kind of guilt payment." He exhaled slowly. "I was wrong." Ashley shook her head frantically. "This is edited," she whispered. "She fabricated this." But no one was listening to her anymore, because the truth, patient, quiet, undeniable, had just begun speaking for itself. The room stayed frozen as my father continued speaking on the screen. For years, that voice had existed only in memories. Now, it filled the boardroom again, steady, deliberate, impossible to ignore. "I was old," he said quietly. "I was tired, and they were loud." The words hung in the air. Ashley shook her head immediately, backing away from the screen as if distance could weaken what everyone was hearing. "That's not true," she muttered. He was confused near the end. He didn't know what he was saying, but the man on the screen didn't sound confused. He sounded precise. "3 months before I recorded this," my father continued, "I found something I wasn't supposed to find." On the video, he reached down beside his desk and lifted a thin folder into view. A ledger. Stephen's chair creaked as he shifted suddenly. My father opened the folder slowly in the recording. "Stephen believed he'd hidden it well enough," he said. "But people underestimate how much time a sick man has to think and to look." The room had become so quiet that even the faint hum of the building's air system felt loud. I started comparing the withdrawals from my retirement accounts. My father said, "Consultation fees, management costs, investment transfers." He looked directly into the camera, and none of it made sense. Stephen's breathing had grown noticeably heavier. Ashley looked between the screen and Stephen, panic beginning to flicker across her face. "This is ridiculous," she said under her breath. "This is completely..." But my father kept talking. While Brooke was working double shifts to help cover the cost of my care, he said slowly, "Someone else was draining the accounts that were supposed to support this family." His voice hardened slightly. "Condos in Aspen." A murmur moved through the room. "Luxury trips." Another ripple. "And consultation payments routed through Stephen's private firm." Stephen stood up abruptly. "That's enough," he snapped. "This is clearly fabricated. Sit down, Stephen." Mr. Sterling's voice cut across the room like a blade. Stephen froze. The attorney didn't even look at him. His eyes remained on the screen. On the recording, my father closed the folder. By the time I understood what had been happening, he continued. "I realized something else." He paused. "I realized the one person they had convinced me to doubt was the only person who had actually been helping me. My throat tightened. I found the records of Brooke's transfers, my father said. The payments for the nursing staff, the tax lien she cleared to keep the estate from collapsing. Ashley's hands began to tremble. You see, my father continued quietly. Ashley and Stephen built a story around her absence. He leaned closer to the camera. But numbers don't lie. A few of the relatives at the table exchanged stunned glances. They told me Brooke had abandoned this family, my father said. But the bank records told a different story. Stephen's face had turned the color of wet cement. On the screen, my father sat back in his chair. So I made a decision. The air in the room seemed to tighten. I contacted Mr. Sterling. The attorney standing near the laptop gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and I executed a final codicil to my will. Ashley's voice broke into a panicked whisper. No, my father's voice became firm. In that codicil, I revoked every cent previously allocated to Ashley and Stephen. The words landed like thunder. The room erupted into shocked whispers. Ashley stumbled backward, grabbing the edge of a chair to steady herself. That's impossible, she gasped. He can't just... But the recording continued. The primary estate, my father said clearly, the investment portfolio totaling $1,200,000 and the remaining $650,000 in savings. He paused just long enough for the numbers to sink in. Are hereby transferred to my only daughter, Brooke. The silence that followed felt almost unreal. Then my father added one more sentence. And the documentation of Stephen's consultation fees and financial transactions has been prepared for review by the district attorney's office. Stephen's composure shattered. He grabbed the edge of the table as if the floor beneath him had suddenly tilted. Ashley made a strangled sound that barely resembled a word. On the screen, my father's expression softened slightly. Brooke, he said quietly, I'm sorry it took me so long to see the truth. He looked straight into the camera. You were never the ghost in this family. The video ended with a soft click. The screen went black. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Ashley collapsed to her knees beside the table, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Brooke, please, she sobbed, crawling toward my side of the room. You have to understand, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Across the table, Stephen stood motionless as Mr. Sterling calmly removed a set of documents from his briefcase. The attorney slid them across the table toward him. A formal notice. Stephen stared at the page without touching it. Just minutes earlier, this room had been a courtroom where they expected to erase me. Now the balance had flipped so completely that even the air felt different. For the first time that morning, no one was laughing anymore. Ashley's composure didn't just crack, it collapsed. One moment she had been the confident sister controlling the room. The next, she was on her knees, beside the table, mascara running down her cheeks in uneven black streaks. Her hands clutched at the edge of my chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Brooke, please, she sobbed, her voice shaking. You have to listen to me. I didn't know it would turn into this. I looked down at her. For years, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would feel anger, maybe satisfaction, maybe even the sharp rush of revenge. Instead, what I felt was something much colder, clarity. Across the table, Stephen looked like a man who had just realized gravity existed again. The smug confidence he had walked in with had vanished completely. His eyes stayed fixed on the documents Mr. Sterling had placed in front of him. A formal notice. Legal language. The kind that turns quiet financial tricks into very loud criminal problems. You talked a lot about character today, Stephen, I said calmly. He didn't answer. He couldn't. And Ashley, I continued glancing back down at my sister. You spent a lot of time explaining what I am worth. Ashley's grip tightened around the fabric of my dress. Please, she whispered. We're sisters. I gently pulled the fabric free from her fingers. We were never sisters, I said quietly. Her face crumpled. I was just a subscription you forgot to cancel. The words hung in the air between us, and today I added the service is over. I stood up. The movement felt strangely simple after everything that had happened. For 10 years, I had been trying to fight my way back into a family that had already decided I didn't belong. Now I understood something much more important. You can't earn your place in a story that was written to erase you. Griffin stood beside me immediately, his small hand sliding into mine without a word. He had been watching everything with the calm, steady focus that had carried him through the entire morning. Together, we walked toward the glass doors of the boardroom. Behind us, the room had turned into something completely different from the battlefield it had been earlier. Mr. Sterling was gathering the forged documents. 2 uniformed officers had arrived quietly in the hallway, waiting to escort Stevens somewhere far less comfortable than a penthouse meeting room. Ashley's sobs followed us across the floor, but I didn't turn around. Some chapters don't need a final conversation. We stepped out into the elevator and the doors closed softly behind us. Later that afternoon, Griffin and I sat on a quiet bench in a small park a few blocks away. The deed to a $1,200,000 estate sat folded inside my bag like it was nothing more than a grocery receipt. My phone buzzed endlessly. The family group chat had exploded with messages. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had opinions, apologies, questions. I looked at the screen for a moment. Then I pressed one simple button. Leave group. After that, the silence felt immediate. One by one, I blocked the numbers that had only remembered I existed when my name appeared next to a large number in a legal document. Griffin leaned against my shoulder, watching the leaves move in the afternoon breeze. And I realized something, sitting there in that quiet park. Freedom isn't just about money. It's about the moment you stop trying to prove your worth to people who already decided you had none. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply walk away. And for the first time in a very long time, when the silence settled around me, it didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. If Brooke's story tells us anything, it's this: being ignored, blamed, or gaslit by the people closest to you doesn't erase your worth. Silence doesn't make lies true. Sometimes the truth just waits, patiently, until the right moment to surface. And when it does, justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it walks in quietly and changes everything. If this story meant something to you, consider liking the video, sharing it with someone who might need it, and subscribing for more stories about resilience, truth, and finding your way back to yourself.